My alcoholic buddy teaches me not only about alcoholism and what it's like to be with an alcoholic, but human psychology. So what I'm learning is that it seems to be, from two experiences, a neighbor who passed away recently who was an alcoholic, and this buddy of mine, it seems to be the case with alcoholism in general that the habit pattern is simply the result of a deep-seated psychological situation. So it doesn't mean that the situation will automatically spawn alcoholism necessarily, but the reverse may be the case, that alcoholics, by and large, may become alcoholics because they have this psychological flaw that leads to alcoholism as a natural consequence, but certainly not as a, as a must. It's not like it has to happen, but it could happen because it's going to guide them in that direction and encourage them. So all they need is a little encouragement from somebody, some circumstance. Oh, try this liquor, you might like it. And then they find, oh, wow, it really is good, because it's in concert with their psychological state. It reinforces it and makes it that much harder to break out of the psychological construct that they've fallen into, because now they have a physical reinforcement in addition to the mental reinforcement, the psychological. Now, the psychological situation that I'm leading to is this. It's hypocrisy. Now, hypocrisy is an interesting thing. A liar, it's a variation on lying, but it's not the same. It's not done the same way, and because of that, it's subtle. It's not so noticeable at first, but it does get to be annoying, and eventually, I found fault with it last night when I realized that by talking with him on the phone, and he's no longer living with me, but by talking over several weeks, chatting amiably, we're swapping, knowledge and sharing, and he's sharing music. I fell into the trap, I found, after a while, because I was going along with his psychological state by not objecting to it, by not recognizing it, by not giving focus to it, by not bringing it up. Well, I wasn't aware of it, but I fell into the same psychological trap. And I learned a technique, which I'll explain to you, a physiological technique that takes care of it. You cannot fall into the trap if you do the physiological technique. It's not possible. And he's refusing my suggestion that he perform this physiological technique. And I'm not surprised. Why should I be surprised? Because he doesn't want to get out of his mental habit pattern. Big surprise. Well, so hypocrisy is very interesting because what it is, it's a dual positioning of two truths that are so selected that they contradict each other, and in so doing create a condition of complete nullification. And so it would be the same as saying a singular lie, but it's very subtle because they individually, the two truths, are not lies. They're true. But because the person holds to them simultaneously, if the person alternated, vacillated back and forth, we could say, oh, you're a vacillating, you got a weak backbone and you're vacillating between opposites. But Maharishi says that's how we grow, by alternating between opposites. We learn about them and we grow. And eventually we grow out of one set of opposites while at the same time growing into a better set of opposites. We replace them, or we refine them if we don't replace them. But we grow because of the alternating process. It's automatic. We don't have to make an effort to grow. We don't have to make an effort to do anything. But we do have to alternate between opposites. And this world is filled with opposites. Well, the problem with a hypocrite is that he takes she takes two truths that are oppositional if taken simultaneously. And that's what they do. They take them simultaneously and they get nowhere. And nothing, because you don't have to give up one in order to do the other. All you have to do is favor one, saying to yourself, well, you know what? I'll do the other one, next time, when the next opportunity arises. I don't have to do it now. I'll just pick one. But the person can't pick. And so, in a sense, they do have a very weak backbone because they're not alternating. This is the natural cycle of life, is to alternate between opposites, night and day, summer and winter, young and old, all kinds of opposites. And we alternate between them in order to grow. But if we don't, we become an alcoholic or an alcoholic mentality, which favors alcoholism. Either way, it's the same thing because we're stuck. We don't grow. And this is probably why Charlie Lutz told us that alcoholism is the toughest bad habit to break. It follows the person from one lifetime to the next, and I can see why. Because it's a psychological status of hypocrisy, in which the person holds on to two truths, which are true, and this is what's so mesmerizing about it, because they believe in those two truths, and because they are two truths, but they are in direct opposition to each other. And the person holds to them simultaneously and never favors one over the other, and so the person is stuck. He doesn't grow, or she. Now, the technique is so simple to eradicate this condition. But trust me, if you are a hypocrite or an alcoholic or both, you won't take my advice. Trust me, 100%. You could pay me $10,000 if you take my advice, but have been a stubborn alcoholic all your life. If you're just a mild alcoholic, you're not really an alcoholic. But my friend was traumatized since childhood, since infancy. Since infancy for 20 plus years, less than 30 years and between 20 and 30 years, he was traumatized by the grown-ups in his family, the so-called parental role models, since infancy. And they were like handed from one adult to the next. One got done with him, and then another one took the other one's place. The guy was physically traumatized. So the guy can't even sleep at night. And drinks to sleep at night. But he's got health issues. He's getting older. He's in his late 20s, and he's got health issues. And he complains about them. And yet, so I caught him on a complaint. Don't worry, I'll get to the technique. I caught him on the complaint because I realized he is not eating, and consequently he has problems with his stomach because he's not eating. On the other hand, he could eat if he allowed himself to cook. And when I say cook, I mean it in a very broad sense because there are different ways to cook, right? But he considers himself a chef because his father was a chef. And so he has to do things a certain way to do it at all. So he's got this slab of steak in the fridge that's going bad, or will, if it hasn't already. And he refuses to cook it in the microwave because, no, he's got to do it a certain way, but it'll take over an hour, and so he doesn't do it at all, and so he doesn't eat. He just keeps drinking beer all day. And immediately I realized the mistake of his logic. This guy thinks he's got, and maybe he does, have a high IQ, but he's not using it. And I've known this about him a long time ago. He doesn't use it. And that's the problem with people who are stuck in a rut. They know better, but they don't do better. And I have to admit, I was falling into that trap before I met him, blaming it on old age. I'm 65, I'm getting old, I feel old. And so I was miserable, I was depressed, and then I met him. And at first it was nice, the titillation of meeting a new friend. But I decided to be friends with him, and I usually don't reach out to people. I usually just stay to myself. And I make all kinds of excuses, just like an alcoholic. Well, my mother was an alcoholic when I was gestating with her, so no surprise, I have that mentality, even though I don't drink. I have the history before birth as if I had, because she gave it to me by giving me an immature development, prenatal development. Anyway, so I needed to learn, I guess, because I didn't know he was an alcoholic. I mean, it was strange when I picked him up as an Uber client that he was on crutches. He had to get an electric one of these electric go-karts, you travel around the supermarket with, in order to shop for his 18-count box of beer cans. It was the blue one. I think it was Modelo. And it was Uber was doing carpooling at the time before COVID, and so I already had a client waiting in the car for him to do his shopping and come back. And she was patient. She waited. And he got in the car, and I couldn't, and this was very curious. Why is this person going to so much desperate trouble? But I didn't know he was an alcoholic. So when I got done with delivering her and then him, I asked him if I could be his, hang out with him, because I wanted to be his friend. And he conceded. And he had a bright aura, so I was taken by his charisma. But I didn't know yet. And then I learned gradually about him. And so this was like a couple of years ago, and so that I've known him. Well, I've always known about this hypocrisy, but I didn't think it was that big a deal. I just thought it was a problem that the second, how some people are sensitive to secondhand smoke. Well, I am. So very extremely. But he can vape in his car several dozen or maybe 50 to 100 yards away, and by the time he comes back to the apartment, I don't smell it on him at all. I didn't even know he was doing it. But if he smokes anywhere, he brings it back and exhales it out of his lungs. So this vaping must be pretty efficient. But when my neighbor vapes, I can't stand it because the fog it creates wafts over to my open window. And so I learned to keep all my windows closed and open the door only briskly and shut it because I can't stand the smell. It's so intense. But apparently there's no residue. Because I never knew he was doing it, and he told me afterwards. But when he drinks, he leaves the open cans, and it's literally his mental state. I can't even stand it when he's drunk. Well, now that he's out because he can't live with me because he wants to drink, so he found a place to stay so he can drink and smoke. And I thought it was okay just to talk to him, and the weeks have been going by, but I found myself falling into this hole, and I had to slap myself out of it by doing the technique that I'm about to describe to you. And it took several times, though, for me to realize something. It wasn't just a technique because I was born to an alcoholic mother while I was gestating to her. It's more than that. I have a mental state that I don't realize is an alcoholic mental state all the time by default. Now, I know that in general, in a very broad sense. I know that. But I never had the opportunity to have it poignantly slapped in my face how true this really is, until I became so annoyed with his behavior that I called him on it, and we had a huge argument, and he hung up, he called me back, and then I hung up, I shut off my phone, and I just don't want to deal with him, not even on the phone anymore, because this is so ridiculously annoying to talk to a hypocrite. So I explained it to him, but he's in denial, just like an alcoholic. He's in denial. Anyway, so there is the technique that so far he has refused to perform upon himself. And if he ever wanted to come back to me, I'd demand it of him. In addition to the other demands that I made before he left. He can't drink and he can't smoke cigarettes. I bought him patches, but he doesn't like patches because he doesn't inhale it. He has to inhale it. So fine, he can go vape in his car, but he cannot drink at all. At all, not even one sip, because an alcoholic has a second personality, and this is something else he denies to my face. My ex had an alternate personality syndrome, and I joke with her when she would fall into it. I called the personality of hers, the secondary one, Gomez, because I didn't know what else to call it, because it wasn't her anymore. So I had to give it a name to give it legitimacy. And of course, she refuses to give it legitimacy when she's in that state, because she refuses to tell me her full name. She's so furious when she's in that state. All she can do is give me her first name as if she doesn't have a last name. And sometimes I wonder if I'm in an alternate personality sometimes, because I want to deny reality and pragmatism and be an idealist. So, I could say the same things about myself, but excuse me, when you meet somebody worse than yourself, it really brings it poignantly to your awareness that, or else it wouldn't jive, see? It wouldn't stir my emotions if it wasn't true for me as well. But it's because it's more extreme that when this situation keeps arising with this alcoholic buddy and I, it motivates me to do whatever it takes to become the opposite. And so his presence is a karmic situation in which he's actually helping me. He's not helping himself. He's just going down the tubes. And he knows it, and he does nothing to stop it. And even then when I make suggestions, he doesn't do it. So it proves to me that he really is hell-bent on suicide. And I think that's the way it is with die-hard alcoholics. They don't have the backbone to commit suicide outright, so they just go and do it slowly instead by destroying themselves. My father, I'm sure it was a suicidal death when we separated when I was a baby, because he literally was so grief-stricken over the separation from his family and the banality of his job, a blue-collar worker, when he had hoped and dreamed of, when he was younger, of becoming a white-collar worker. But his family didn't have the money to pay for his education. This was before World War II. They didn't have programs for students. And after the war, he didn't get any GI package because he didn't fight in the war. He what do you call it? He dodged the draft by building roads across the Rockies for our government for free, and got no package send-off package when the war was over. Zip. He immediately had to go to blue-collar jobs, and that's what he had for the rest of his life. So he was pretty miserable. And the autopsy report, he had edema everywhere. He had it on the brain. He had it here, there. He was so swollen, it was pathetic. He was sick with pneumonia for 2 months and did nothing about it, claiming, I'm a faith healer. I'm a Christian Scientist. And by the time he got so sick that his friends told him, hey, look, we got to take you to the hospital, they got him in the cab, and on the way, in the cab, he died of a stroke or something, heart attack or stroke. I think it was a stroke. So he was in denial. He was living the life of an alcoholic. He was stuck between two opposites and failed because he failed to move. So that's all I have to do. If I look at somebody and I see they're stuck in a rut, then they are in that alcoholic mental state, regardless of whether or not they are drinking. They've already programmed their brain from past lifetimes to be an alcoholic by default, whether or not they drink now in this lifetime, because if they fall into that rut of depression or whatever excuse they make, I'm lazy, and they are failing to move forward, then it proves to me they've been an alcoholic in past lives, and they've trained themselves to remember from their soul how to fall into that trap with effortlessness. They just fall right into it. The slightest lame excuse, right back into it. Now, the trick, I learned a long time ago when I was a younger person that I'm weak-willed too. I don't have much strong backbone to face the problems of life. But I learned through the process of Hatha Yoga, you do poses and postures that changes your energy state. You can do acupuncture, changes the energy flows, pathways in the body. You can take up martial arts, and that changes the energy flows. Well, I learned there are so many different ways, physiological techniques, to change the energy of the mind or to change the energy of the body, so you don't have to resort to a mental technique if you don't want to. So here's the technique. You wash out your rectum with soap. When you're in the shower, bathing, you soap up your two middle fingers, your fuck fingers, your bird fingers. You soap them up really good. You soak up your anus and the area around it on your backside before you stick one finger in, and then you pry open to make room to stick your other finger in, and you separate your anus. You enlarge it sideways, not up and down. If you do it up and down, you're going to give yourself an anal fissure and then blame me that I gave you bad advice, because that's the suture that occurs when our prenatal cleft closes up when we become either boys or girls. When we're really young fetuses, we have this huge Grand Canyon in our crotch that goes from our belly button to our tailbone. And at some point in our development as a fetus, it closes up, more so for boys, obviously, than for girls, but it closes up, but it leaves a suture mark, as if somebody had tied us up at the operating table. And it's very obvious at the bottom end of the anus. It's very obvious. And so if you pull apart your anus with two fingers, your two middle fingers up and down in a vertical way, you'll be hitting against that suture and ripping it apart in all likelihood. I did it. I learned the hard way how to do this. You got to do it sideways, not horizontally, not vertically. And you get in there and you move your fingers around and you wipe the inside of your rectum with your soaped up fingers, and then you stick your butt under the shower. So you've got your shower head up above you, and you had your backside facing away from the shower while you soap up the inside of your rectum. And then when it's time to rinse, you turn around so your butt is facing the stream of water coming down. So you already have the shower on, running while you're doing this. And you put your backside under the shower, the falling water, so that the water cascades, and you can draw your fingers halfway out and halfway in to try to rinse your fingers and hands off. And so you take them out, and then you turn back, and then you soap it up again, and you go through this like half a dozen times, as long as it takes to get all of the residue of poop out of your rectum, so that there is no poop coming out when you take your fingers out, because that's when the poop will most likely come out, is when you take your fingers out. The poop comes with your fingers, and if you find hard rocks of poop, pull them out. But if they're soft, they may come out when you take your fingers out, in all likelihood, if you did a thorough job, because the soap is kind of a lubricant. And that's, in fact, the basis for water-based sexual lubricants is glycerin, and glycerin is what Neutrogena soap is all about. So it is a lubricant as well as a soaping chemical, glycerin in Neutrogena bars, and the vegetable glycerin in water-based sexual lubricants. But I prefer to use a body wash soap that's in a pump, and it's so thick, like Jell-O, that I used my previous pump that I got emptied out, and I spilled half of the new batch into that one, and then added tap water to fill it up, and then shook it up, so it's now diluted 50-50 with water, and it comes out a lot easier, and I waste less of it. It's not so thick. But I got a body wash that was high quality from Walmart. I thought it is, and I still think it is. It stunk like hell when I opened it up to spill it out, and add water. But it's really healthy, and it's flavored with an extract from tea tree. And if you know anything about tea tree, it's related to eucalyptus, which has a clarifying effect. Like if you have mucus in your lungs, they have these vapors that you use. Some are mentholated, that comes from peppermint. Menthol comes from peppermint in the natural format. But the other thing that's good for congestion in the lungs is eucalyptus. And eucalyptus is related to tea tree. So tea tree has that quality that it helps break up thick mucus, and I have a lot of thick mucus. I cough up mucus at the end of a meal. It's so bad, sometimes I have to take lots of cayenne pepper capsules to thin it out and stop the coughing, because it's ridiculous. I can cough like I did at the beginning of this recording because I just had mucus just sitting there. Anyway, so tea tree seems to be a very important factor here, is to get soap that has tea tree extract in it. But it was the luck of the draw. I chose something very good for me, and now I'm using it in a way that I've tried before soap washing the inside of my rectum, but it's never had such fantastic results. I'm telling you, you cannot be an alcoholic. You cannot be a hypocrite and do this practice. Now, I did try to put it in my water pick to irrigate my mouth, and I realized I don't need to. I don't need to put soap in my mouth. The adage, if you say the parent says to the child, if I find you cussing another time, I'm warning you, I'll wash out your mouth with soap. And there's even a scene in the movie Christmas Story. Peter Billingsley plays little Ralphie, and he says the F word, and because his father's cussing all the time, saying the F word. But Ralphie's not allowed to do that, and so Mommy sticks a bar of Lifebuoy or Ivory in his mouth. I think it's Lifebuoy. And sits there and until it's long enough for him to confess and say he's sorry and look like he means it. So he was humbling. And then she tries to put it in her mouth and she said, wow, that tastes awful. It does, and it's not really necessary. Instead of that, I still adhere to putting pre-dissolved borax into the water pick container but now I add lemon juice, because I learned by experimenting with putting soap in there that I needed to put lemon juice in there to cut the awful flavor of the body wash soap. Well, I'd already been taking the borax in tap water by itself and just grinning and bearing it, or not so grinning and bearing it. But now I don't have to suffer at all, because I've learned now from the tea tree, from the body wash soap business, to put lemon juice with the borax, and everything's fine. And so I use that for cleaning out my mouth. But for cleaning out the rectum, it's the dirtiest area of the body. When you consider how dirty a person could become, like, if you don't shower for a few months, like Nick Nolte didn't shower when he was doing the role Down and Out. He was playing a homeless person in the movie. It was called Down and Out in Beverly Hills. And Richard Dreyfuss played the husband, and Bette Midler played his wife. Nick Nolte was the homeless person that Richard Dreyfuss's character takes in to, give him a nicer life. But because Nick Nolte is a method actor, in order to get into the role, he didn't shower the whole time that he was playing the role. For 2 months, he's walking around the set stinking like crazy. Everybody avoided him. But he was getting into the role like every good method actor. Well, that's filthy, right? But the rectum is still more filthy than that. It always is. And so what better place to put the soap in? What better reason to use soap than in the rectum? Not in the mouth if you say dirty words. And trust me, if you wash out your rectum faithfully, and if you have a habit of cussing, you won't need to have a bar of Lifebuoy stuck in your mouth, because you took care of the problem. All of that desire to cuss is coming from a dirty, filthy rectum. So that's all you have to do, is keep the rectum clean. You don't have to take enemas. You don't have to do colonics. Just put soap inside your rectum and make it so clean that if I were to put mashed potatoes in your rectum and then scoop it out, or you smush it around thoroughly and then scoop it out, I would be able to eat it. To be able to make your rectum that clean, well, I'd get soap residue in my mouth, but nothing that would make me sick. No E. coli, no poop, no dysentery. So that's my little recording for this podcast, because I was waiting. I didn't want to speak right away when I first started doing this. And it's good I held off, because it took me a while to learn all of these little details. And I'm just blown away. It's amazing. But hypocrisy apparently is the hard. See, this is what Charlie was really saying when he said that alcoholism is the hardest addiction to break. No, what he was really saying, and he spoke in metaphors anyway. So what he was really saying was hypocrisy is the hardest addiction to break, because you're dwelling on two truths. So how can you convince yourself that you're lying? Well, because you pick them because they're oppositional. You pick the wrong pair of truths to pair off with each other simultaneously. If you would pick two that get along, they help each other, right? But you're picking two, and so you create this internal war. And before my mom died, 3 weeks before, I was in that state. And my mother is the prior incarnation of this alcoholic buddy. So it's no small wonder that I met him. It's no small wonder that I was in a state of locked up depression before her death for 3 weeks from Lou Gehrig's disease. Because on the one hand, I had the opinion that she would get through this latest period of extra sickness that she was going through that made it look dangerous that she might die. So I believed that she would get through it and overcome it and survive. Yet on the other hand, I was convinced, no, this is pretty serious. And both opinions I held simultaneously, and I gave them equal weight. And my only way out of it was to fast. I fasted on carrot juice and whatnot for 2 or 3 days. And finally, the internal war, the internal conflict stopped. And the only reason why it stopped was because I got hungry and I wanted to go back to eating again. And the minute I started eating, the conflict came back again until she died. And it kept going on for weeks afterwards, because like 5 weeks afterwards, I was so angry and depressed at the same time, grief-stricken and angry when she died. Because I was a holder of two opinions. I both loved her and hated her, equally so. So that created a locked-up depression before she died, because it was of equal weight. So I've had this problem all my life, and I've never figured out how to get out of it. And now I have a physiological technique that gives me relief until it comes time, due for me to take another shower and wash out my butt. So I'll take a shower in the interim and not wash out my butt because I'm not interested in using soap anyway. I just want to rinse off. Okay, fine. So I rinse off because I don't feel like I need to do it. But when I feel the need to use soap because my skin is dirty, well, then it's time to do the butt too, because you can imagine if the skin is dirty, the butt is too. And if the skin's not that dirty, then probably the butt's not that dirty either. So you do it, when you feel the need. You'll get a feeling. You'll know when to choose, when to do it, and when not to do it. See, I'm in a habit of taking showers with no soap anyway, because I'm not a big fan of soap. But I just want to rinse off, and in the course of drying off, the towel takes off not just water, but it takes off some of the oil. Now, the showering takes off some of the oil, but not all of it. The towel takes off more, but because I didn't use soap, there is some oil left behind. And I tend to have dry skin, so I'm not a big fan of using soap to take off all my oils from my skin. I want my skin to be moist, but this body wash is like an emollient. It causes this, whatever tissue it comes into contact with, to like swell up with water. It's amazing. That's a hygroscopic property, to get tissues to absorb and retain fluid instead of being dried out. I tend to have very dry, flaky skin, like around my face area, and in the wintertime I tend to get it on my hands. So I don't enjoy using soap for that reason. It's not that I don't want to be clean. I want to be clean. I just don't want to be dry. But this body wash is really formulated really good and not drying out the skin. Like harsh cast-style soaps like Bronner's soap will do. I use that for my dishwashing soap because I want pure soap. I don't want to use Dawn or whatever that has chemicals in it and aluminum dyes, Blue 90 number 7 or something. Blue Lake number 7, with aluminum in it. So it is a harsh soap, Bronner's soap, because it's a cast-style soap. It's potassium hydroxide, which is very harsh on the skin. But I only use it for washing my dishes. And sometimes I don't use that. I use the bar soap. I got a bar of silver soap that I use for hand washing. So lots of times I just use that for washing my dishes. But for the body, the face, the hair, the rectum, body wash soap with tea tree rocks.